suspect!
Coming to get you, Bobber.
Walter's got Nards!
Hi guys, my name is Barry and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at our top 10 horror movies of 2021. Going into 2021, despite all obviously the pandemic etc, it was looking good for horror in 2021 with all the titles that were coming out. But in actual fact, when I set this top 10 up, I found it quite difficult because some of the movies in my top 10 are not great, to be honest. I saw only 17 new releases in 2021 in the horror genre, so seeing 17 movies and expecting all of them to be great was obviously unrealistic, but I needed to have a top 10. So when I do this top 10 guys, the 10 movies in this list are not amazing. There are some in the lower scale of this list that I probably wouldn't watch again, but because they are the top 10, then I have to mention them. And at number 10 is CANDYMAN. Now I thought CANDYMAN was actually okay. It didn't exceed any expectations whatsoever when I saw it. I was expecting more, if I'm being honest. I was expecting more Tony Todd, if I'm being honest as well. And maybe the fan of the original in me expected and wanted to see more of that Tony Todd aspect and that feeling that we got in the original CANDYMAN movie. None of that was present here. It felt like a dull movie that had a different message than what I wanted for the movie. It felt like it concentrated more on real life issues than the movie world. And when I go and see a horror movie, I want to escape the real world, not because I don't want to ever see it again, because after the movie I will see the real world, but I just wanted to escape for a couple of hours and enjoy a horror movie, a movie that I was actually interested in the franchise, and the trailers made it look pretty good, but overall it was a little bit disappointing. However, it still made the top 10. And at number 9 is SUPERHOST. Now I didn't even know anything about this movie until the movie came out, and it's only through recommendations online that I actually got to watching this movie. I probably wouldn't have ever seen this movie whatsoever if I didn't see all these recommendations for the movie when it came out. And it exceeded what I expected it to be. I know that some people like to over exaggerate things when they first see a movie. When, you know, I do it myself. When I see a movie I go, oh my god, that was the best movie ever. Then after a little while, when it all settles in, you're like, do you know what, it wasn't as good as I thought it was. But this movie, when I seen people writing online, this is great, you know, this is fantastic, it's very unique, I was like, okay, are they over exaggerating? Possibly. But when I watched it, I agree, I think it was fantastic. One of the surprises of the year anyway. And at number 8 is Fear Street 1666. Now I'd done a review for this movie, and I did say in the review that when I see movies that are set in that time period, like The Witch etc, I don't like it. But because of the stories that are going in and out of this Fear Street, I connected with the characters a little bit more. The acting was fantastic in this movie, and even though it was set in these days that I don't really like, I still was invested in the story. I think the story helped it, and even though it was set back in the day, it had a modern twist to it as well. And again, as a whole, as a trilogy of the Fear Street movies, it wasn't great, but this one stood out for me because I wasn't expecting much from it, and because I got a lot more than I was bargaining and than what I was expecting, then again this movie exceeded my expectations. And at number 7 is Malignant. Now this is one that is on the list, it is number 7, but I was very disappointed by the movie. It is better than the previous movies I've just mentioned, but this is one of the ones I was very disappointed in, and that's because it's obviously James Wan. James Wan directs some fantastic movies. And visually, this movie is mesmerising. You know, this movie looks great. The sound design is fantastic. The acting's really good. It's just the story was a little bit too out there. Now, I do like movies that take it that little bit further, but this one felt like they went a little bit outside the box. And even though they knew it, they went a little bit too far and too extreme. It is unique, I'll give them that. Everything about this movie looks great, but there's just something about the story that just goes way too far. But because it had too many positives, it has to be on the list. And at number 6 is Silent Night. Now this is a surprise one as well, because I didn't see this one till maybe last week or so, and I was actually going to avoid the movie because the trailer made it look bleak, and that's what it was. It was very, very bleak. This was very bleak viewing for anyone who watches this movie. It starts off kind of funny, like a comedy, like a dark black comedy, and I didn't really like that. I thought because of the seriousness of the subject in this movie, I thought maybe they're being a little bit too funny, or trying to be a little bit too funny, because it's the end of the world, or the end of them at least. But as the movie progresses and as the characters become more developed, you get to know the characters a little bit more and what they're fighting for, or what they're trying to fight against. And then when the inevitable happens, or when it's about to happen, you see their lives flashing before their eyes. And again, like I said, it's bleak, but it was very good. It's hard to explain. It's a movie that you don't really want to watch, especially around the holidays, but it's one that when you watch it, you're like, wow, it's very powerful without trying to be too powerful. It kind of gets messages across like it's inadvertently trying to get across without throwing it in your face. It's very hard to explain, but if you haven't seen Silent Night, I think I would highly recommend it, because although it's a bleak movie, it's maybe an important movie to watch. And then number 5 is Fear Street 1978. Now I will tell you right now guys, Fear Street 1994 is not on the list. I thought it was okay, but it just didn't quite make the list. Whereas Fear Street 1978 was the best of the trilogy in my opinion. It takes you back to the old early 80s, late 70s of course, 1978 slasher movies. Backwoods slasher movies like Friday the 13th, The Burning, Just Before Dawn. It had that feeling about it. The acting was great as well. The killer was fantastic in it as well, very menacing. Out of all the killers in this little trilogy that the Netflix brought out, I think the killer in the 1978 version was the best, more menacing, and it felt like you couldn't get away from this guy. So with all that being said, Fear Street 1978 was by far the best in that little trilogy, and that's again why it beats the rest of them on this list. And then number 4 is Don't Breathe 2. Now you get that phrase where you're saying you're beating a dead horse. When I found out they were making a sequel to this, I thought, yep, they're beating up the dead horse, or beating the dead horse. Now I wasn't quite sure, even when I was watching the movie, was I watching a sequel or was I watching a prequel? Lo and behold, we're watching a sequel. But I think it was a decent film. I think how great Don't Breathe was. I thought you're never going to live up to Don't Breathe. And yes, they don't live up to the first movie, but they make a worthy sequel, and a sequel that I actually felt made sense, and a sequel that I thought, okay, they're not just beating a dead horse, they're giving us an expansion of this character. Yes, he's supposed to be a bad guy, and he still is a bad guy at the end of the day, but he's still human. He's still a human being. He makes mistakes, he tries to make amends, and he does all those things in this movie. So whether you love him or hate him, he's still an interesting character that was worthy of a sequel. And then number 3 is Last Night in Soho. Now I'm disappointed in myself that I didn't do a movie review for this. I was going to do a movie review, but because of the timing of this movie came out, I just couldn't do one. So I would just make this short and sweet anyway. But I expected this movie to be great, and it was fantastic. Edgar Wright is one of the best directors around right now, and he really shines in this one with the set design, the directing, the way this movie looks was absolutely mesmerising. From the moment we see this character get in and out of this dreamlike world, my eyes were glued to the TV for the acting, for the set design, for absolutely everything about this film. Now it does, I'll be honest, the end of the movie kind of fizzles out at the end. Still a good ending, but it didn't quite live up to how good it was at the very beginning. It took a slow decline all the way through the movie, but even at the very end when it was at its worst, it was still great. But the beginning of the movie was absolutely fantastic, and I did say to myself when I started watching this movie, for the first 20 minutes or so, I thought to myself, this is going to be my number 1 horror. But as the movie progressed, it went down a little bit, but number 3, you can't knock that. And then number 2 is Halloween Kills. Now yes, I know that you all know me, I'm a massive Halloween fan, but I do have to be realistic. I'm not going to make it number 1 because I love Halloween, and in fact this movie probably won't make a lot of people's lists when it comes to doing the top 10 horror movies of 2021. This was a divisive horror movie. Some people loved it, some people hated it, and I don't see that very many people going down the middle, and I'm one of the ones that absolutely loved this movie. I think it was a little bit better than Halloween 2018, mainly because we're getting a more Michael Myers story rather than a Laurie Strode story. We've seen Laurie Strode before, and although we've seen Michael Myers before, we do want to see Michael Myers doing what he does best, just for this one movie at least, because We already know there's a Halloween Ends coming, so let's enjoy Halloween Kills. It's the middle of the road, there was delays in the movie, there was cuts, there was deleted scenes, etc. It was a little bit of a mess at times, but we have to enjoy it for what it is, and I thought it was so entertaining from beginning to end. Yes, the dialogue was dodgy, but the dialogue in Halloween movies has never been Oscar winning stuff, so I don't know what other people were expecting. It's not a documentary, it's not a true story, it's not a crime, it's not an Oscar movie, it's just a fun popcorn Halloween horror movie, and it ticks all the boxes for me, and therefore it's number 2. And then number 1 is A Quiet Place Part 2. Now some people probably have forgotten this movie existed, because this was one of the first, if not the very first movie that suffered the delays of the COVID outbreak back in 2020. As you know, this is supposed to be a 2020 movie, but it got delayed by a year and people just forgot about it, and that was it. Made a lot of money at the box office for a sequel and for a movie that just came out post-pandemic. But again, this is another movie just like Don't Breathe where you didn't need a sequel because the first movie was so good. In A Quiet Place, the first movie was absolutely amazing. This one isn't quite as good as the first movie, but that would be hard to do, and it would be unfair to hate on a movie because it's not as good as A Quiet Place, because it would be very hard to do that. This one, the only thing missing from A Quiet Place Part 2 is the emotional aspect with the father and the kids. That was missing from this movie. Everything else was there though. We got a little bit more of a backstory and a reason for what these things are doing, and I like that because it's spreading the story out, and it's obviously leading us on to A Quiet Place Part 3 if and when that eventually comes out. And because they expanded on the story and gave us more characters, I'm looking forward to seeing a possible finale. I'm sure that maybe if they do a third one, that will be it. You never know. But I'm glad that they've done it the way they did, expanding on the monsters, expanding on the characters, giving us a little bit more dialogue as well with the reasons behind that. It was great. Very surprising, and again, because it's one of those movies I thought, you're never going to live up to the first one. Not only are you never going to live up to it, this one's probably going to be bad, but it wasn't. This one was amazing. The acting was astonishing. There's nothing I could say bad about this movie other than the fact, and this isn't even a negative, they just didn't have as much of an emotional impact in this movie as they did in the first one, but that would be very hard to do and very unfair to mark it down for that, because this movie was almost perfect. So that is my top 10 horror movies of 2021, guys. There might be movies missing on this list because A, I didn't like them as much as maybe you did, or B, I didn't see the movies, or even C, I don't consider them horror movies. Now, people might ask me, where is Ghostbusters Afterlife on this list? Well, I think Ghostbusters Afterlife was fantastic, but I don't consider that a horror movie. I consider it more of a family movie than a horror movie, so that's one of the reasons why Ghostbusters didn't make the list. It's simply not a horror movie to me. So guys, my question to you is, what is your top 10 horror movies of 2021? You can give reasons behind it if you want, and what do you think of my top 10? Do you agree? Do you disagree? As always, leave your comments down below, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.